The sun was setting behind the dense, dark forest that bordered the kingdom of Liren, casting long shadows across the narrow, winding path that led to a small, isolated cottage. Its thatched roof was barely visible through the trees, hidden by a veil of thick mist that crept from the damp ground. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of old wood and the faint trace of dried herbs. A fire crackled weakly in the hearth, the only source of warmth in the otherwise cold room. Arya sat by the fire, her hands trembling as she worked on a piece of fabric. Her dark hair, long and unkempt, fell loosely around her shoulders, and her pale skin seemed to glow in the flickering light. She was a woman alone, isolated, rejected by the world outside. Her heart ached with every stitch she made, each thread binding her not just to the cloth, but to the harsh reality that had become her life. In the kingdom of Liren, a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear children, especially sons. The people were werewolves, their lineage tied to the strength of their bloodline, and the continuation of that bloodline depended on fertility. Arya had been born into a noble family, but she was cursed. Despite her youth and beauty, she could not give birth. The elders whispered that she was barren, a failure in the eyes of the pack, unworthy of the Alpha's attention, and certainly not fit to bear his heirs. Her father had been forced to keep her hidden away from the eyes of the kingdom, to avoid the shame of her existence tarnishing their reputation. He would visit her only in secret, bringing her what little she needed, but the rest of the time she was alone in the cottage, abandoned by a world that deemed her useless. Arya had long since stopped dreaming of love or happiness. There was only silence in the woods, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant howl of wolves on the hunt. She had learned to live with the loneliness, to accept it as part of her existence. After all, what else could she do? What hope did she have left? Her mother had passed away years ago, leaving behind only the bitter memories of a woman who had tried to protect her daughter, but had been powerless in the face of the kingdom's harsh customs. Arya's mother had often spoken of the prophecy, a mysterious tale passed down through generations of werewolves, one that foretold the coming of an Alpha Queen, a mate who would end the long-standing curse that plagued their kind. But Arya had dismissed it as nothing more than a myth. How could she, the Barren One, be the answer to such a prophecy? The fire crackled again, and Arya's gaze flickered to the window. The wind howled outside, tugging at the trees, as though calling to her. For a brief moment, she thought she heard a distant growl, low and menacing, but the sound faded into the night. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was just the wolves in the forest, hungry and restless. Still, a shiver ran down her spine. The night deepened, and Arya closed her eyes, trying to push the thoughts from her mind. She had long given up on the idea of change. She would remain here, in this small cottage, forgotten by the world, until her time came. Whatever that time might be. But little did she know, far beyond the walls of her cottage, in the heart of the kingdom, a storm was brewing, a storm that would change her fate forever. Lucien, the Alpha King, was searching for something, or rather, someone. He did not yet know it, but the woman in the cottage, the one they called Barren, was about to become the most important person in his life. Word count, 700 words. Dito por si. Ok, próxima parte. Não faça o roteiro em português e sim no idioma selecionado. Ao lado do título, adicione a quantidade de palavras. Não adicione emojis. Foque em um roteiro limpo e bem escrito para a narração. Lembre-se, siga a quantidade de palavras do capítulo. Isso é obrigatório. Com base no outline fornecido, desenvolva o roteiro do vídeo seguindo cada parte individualmente, sem antecipar os assuntos das próximas partes. Siga estas diretrizes rigorosamente. Escreva uma parte por vez e pare ao final de cada uma para revisão antes de continuar. Respeite o número exato de palavras definido para cada parte. As transições devem ser naturais e fluídas, garantindo continuidade sem parecer abrupta. Não descreva como será a cena. Digite apenas o texto. Evite atropelar informações da próxima parte. Aborde apenas o que está definido na parte atual. Mantenha a retenção do espectador com ganchos inseridos de forma natural, sem forçar. Gere apenas textos no idioma definido. Não mude de língua de modo algum. Caso o idioma solicitado tenha sido, por exemplo, espanhol ou inglês, o roteiro deve ser escrito nesse idioma sem alterações. Gere o roteiro seguindo essas diretrizes, garantindo coesão, fluidez e clareza. Extras narrativos obrigatórios. Os diálogos devem ser autênticos, refletindo a personalidade, emoções e contexto dos personagens com realismo. Inclua descrições vívidas do ambiente, clima e emoções internas dos personagens quando necessário, para gerar conexão emocional. Siga a quantidade de palavras e informe qual o capítulo no começo de cada parte. Cliente 007, Historias Dice, Part 2, Arya's Isolation, 700 words. The days in the cottage passed slowly, each one a blur of quiet solitude. The forest surrounding Arya was dense, its towering trees casting long, cold shadows across the small clearing where the cottage stood. Even in the dead of winter, when the air turned frigid and the earth froze beneath her feet, the silence remained constant. No birds sang, no wind howled. The world outside felt distant, as though she were removed from it entirely. Arya would spend hours each day tending to the small garden near the cottage, her hands moving instinctively as she pulled weeds from the soil. The work was a way to keep herself busy, to feel as though she were contributing to something, even if it was only the growth of a few vegetables. But the satisfaction was fleeting, for the truth remained. She was nothing but a shadow, an unwanted relic of a family line, too proud to cast her aside completely. The nights were the hardest. As the wind howled through the forest, she would sit in front of the fire, her eyes fixed on the flames as if they might somehow offer answers to the questions swirling in her mind. What had she done wrong? Why had she been cursed in this way? Every time she tried to imagine a future beyond this cottage, the vision was always clouded by the heavy fog of doubt. Her family had once been proud, noble even, but now they were nothing more than a distant memory. Her father, who had once been the lord of a thriving estate, had become a mere shadow of himself, his face haggard and worn by years of worry. Her mother had died when she was young, leaving behind only whispered stories of love and loss. Arya had never been able to ask her the questions that burned within her heart, questions that might have helped her understand the world and her place in it. But her mother's death, like everything else, had been swallowed up by the passage of time. Now Arya was left with only her thoughts and the occasional visit from her father, who came less and less as the months dragged on. His visits were always brief, a hurried exchange of pleasantries and supplies, and then he would leave, his face hard with the weight of guilt. It was as if he couldn't bear to look at her, couldn't bear to face the reality of what she had become. She hated it. She hated feeling like an afterthought, a burden to a family that once valued her, but there was nothing she could do, no way to escape. One evening, as the sky turned a deep purple and the first stars began to twinkle above the horizon, Arya wandered to the edge of the forest. The trees were tall and ancient, their trunks gnarled and twisted, like the hands of forgotten gods reaching toward the heavens. She walked slowly, her feet crunching on the dry leaves, each step echoing in the silence. The air was crisp, and she pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, trying to ward off the chill that seeped into her bones. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the darkened horizon. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest hint of something wild, untamed. Arya's heart skipped a beat. The wolves were near. She had always been aware of them, of course. They roamed the forest wild and free as they always had been, but there was something different in the air tonight. A sense of anticipation, as if something was about to happen, something that would change everything. Her thoughts were interrupted by a rustling in the trees behind her. She turned quickly but saw nothing. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and she could feel the blood rushing in her ears. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. No response. Just the eerie silence of the forest, the feeling that she was being watched. For a moment she thought she saw movement, a shadow darting between the trees. She strained her eyes, but it was gone. as quickly as it had appeared. Her heart raced in her chest, her instincts telling her to run, but she stood frozen. Something told her that the forest was not just a place of isolation. It was alive with secrets, with mysteries that were waiting to be uncovered. But then, as quickly as it had come, the feeling faded. The night resumed its quiet rhythm, and the rustling in the trees died away. Arya took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. It was just her imagination, she told herself, nothing more. Still, a seed of unease had been planted, and it lingered in her mind as she made her way back to the cottage, the wind whispering through the branches above. Back in the safety of her small home, Arya sat by the fire once again, the flames dancing before her. But this time the silence was different. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of hope. The night stretched on, and with it the feeling that someone was out there waiting for her. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Liren, sending flurries of dust and snow into the air. The kingdom had been at peace for many years, but peace, as always, came with its own set of challenges. From the towering walls of the castle, the Alpha King could see the entire kingdom laid out before him, the bustling market squares, the stone homes, the distant forests that marked the borders of his realm. But Lucien, the Alpha King, wasn't looking at the landscape. His eyes were focused inward on the weight of his duties, the responsibility of keeping his kingdom secure. Lucien stood on the balcony of his chamber, the cool breeze tugging at his dark, wavy hair. His broad shoulders were squared, and his steely eyes betrayed none of the turmoil that twisted inside him. As the Alpha, he was expected to be strong, unyielding even. Yet beneath the surface there was a restlessness gnawing at him. His kingdom had prospered, but that prosperity was fragile. Without an heir, it would all crumble. The Alpha King had lived a life of duty and tradition, but now, with the future of his pack uncertain, everything had become a question. For years, Lucien had been surrounded by suitors and suggestions, forced into countless meetings with elders and advisors, all eager to find him the perfect mate, someone young, fertile, and worthy of the crown. But none of them had captured his attention. None of them had made his heart stir with anything other than obligation. He had never believed in love, never believed in destiny. But what he had always believed in was strength, the strength to protect, the strength to lead. Yet here he stood on the edge of his kingdom, waiting for something he could not even define. He needed an heir, but more than that, he needed to break free from the rigid traditions that had defined his life. His mind turned back to the rumors that had begun to surface in recent months. A woman, hidden away, exiled from society because of her inability to bear children. Her name was Arya. The stories had intrigued him. Arya, the Barren woman. She was not a noble woman, nor a high-born princess, but there was something about her that intrigued Lucien. She had lived in isolation for years, hidden from the eyes of the kingdom. But Lucien had heard whispers that she was more than just the curse the kingdom had painted her as, that she might hold the key to something greater. That perhaps, despite everything, she could still be the mate he needed to secure the future of his pack. The full moon was just beginning to rise on the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the land. It was the perfect night for a hunt. The pack had gathered in the forest, their powerful forms slipping between the shadows, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Lucien was one of them, both man and wolf, a creature forged by the moon's influence. As the Alpha, he led the charge, his pack following his every command with unwavering loyalty. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere. Tonight, he wasn't hunting for game. He was hunting for something far more elusive. The journey to find Arya was not one Lucien had planned. He had been told of her location, tucked away in the woods on the outskirts of the kingdom. No one had dared to visit her save for a few brief family visits. To most, she was an afterthought, a symbol of failure. But to Lucien, she was the answer he hadn't known he was searching for. The cold night air seemed to press in around him as he rode through the forest, the sound of his horse's hooves muffled by the thick blanket of snow. His cloak billowed behind him, his sharp eyes scanning the path ahead. The forest seemed endless, and yet, somewhere in its heart, the woman he had heard so much about waited. Lucien's thoughts were interrupted as the silhouette of a small cottage appeared through the trees. The sight was almost haunting in its isolation. There were no lights in the windows, no sounds emanating from within. It was as if the place had been abandoned by time itself, and yet there she was, Arya. He dismounted his horse quietly, stepping forward with measured steps. His heart beat louder now, a strange fluttering he hadn't expected. He was Alpha, the ruler of this kingdom, and yet, standing before this forgotten woman, he felt something else. The urge to protect, the need to understand. He lifted his hand to knock on the door, but hesitated for just a moment. What would he say? How could he explain himself to her, to someone who had been hidden away for so long, to someone who likely hated the world that had rejected her? Before he could answer that question, the door creaked open. Arya stood before him, her face soft in the moonlight. Her eyes widened, clearly startled by his sudden appearance, and for a fleeting moment Lucien saw something in her expression, a mix of fear and defiance, as though she had long been prepared for an encounter like this, yet dreading it all the same. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice wary but calm, a slight tremor in the words. Lucien's gaze softened as he took in her figure. She was more beautiful than the rumors had suggested. Her long hair, wild and untamed, framed her face like a dark halo. There was an ethereal quality to her, a quiet strength that defied the world's judgment of her. He couldn't help but feel that fate had brought him here. "I'm Lucien," he said, his voice low and steady. "The Alpha King." The night was cold, but the air between them felt even colder, a silence hanging thick as Arya stared at the man before her. Lucien, the Alpha King, stood in the doorway, his presence commanding, yet somehow oddly gentle in the quiet of her home. The faint glow of the moon illuminated his face, and for the first time Arya realized how much weight he carried. There was something in his eyes, something that reflected both power and weariness. She hadn't expected this, hadn't known what to expect, really, when she'd opened the door to find a man of such status standing there. The rumors she had heard about him painted him as an imposing figure, a man whose very name struck fear into the hearts of those who crossed him. And yet here he was, standing before her as if he had every right to be there, and worse, asking for her attention. "I'm Lucien," he repeated, his voice low and steady, though she could hear the subtle tension in his tone. "The Alpha King." Arya blinked, trying to process what he had said. Of all the things that could have happened tonight, this was not one she had ever considered. Her heart raced in her chest, the initial shock fading into a guarded confusion. "I know who you are," she said quietly, her voice laced with a mixture of surprise and caution. She tried to step back, but something in the way he looked at her made her hesitate. "But what is it you want from me, Your Majesty?" Lucien's gaze softened, though his expression remained serious. "I'm here because I need your help." Arya's brow furrowed. She opened her mouth to protest, but Lucien raised a hand, stopping her before she could speak. "I understand how this must seem," he said, his voice carrying a note of sincerity. "You've been hidden away, judged by others for something beyond your control. But that is not why I'm here." She crossed her arms over her chest, not willing to let down her guard so easily. Her life had taught her that no one, especially not someone as powerful as the Alpha King, came to her with good intentions. Everyone wanted something from her, whether they said it outright or not. "Then why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucien took a step closer, the intensity of his presence making her pulse quicken. His eyes locked onto hers, unwavering, and for a moment she could see the weight of his responsibilities in them. There was a weariness there, an almost desperate need for something or someone that she hadn't anticipated. "I'm here because I need a queen," Lucien said, his words direct and blunt. "And I believe you may be the one I've been searching for." Arya's heart skipped a beat. The idea was so foreign, so outrageous, that she couldn't grasp it fully at first. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words failed her. She simply stared at him, unable to process the gravity of his statement. Lucien continued, his voice unwavering. "I've searched for a mate, someone who can bear my heirs, someone who can lead beside me. But there's more to being an Alpha Queen than just blood. It's about strength, and resilience. It's about uniting the pack. And I believe you have those qualities, even if the kingdom has cast you aside for something you cannot control. Arya's mind raced, the words tumbling over one another in her head. A queen? Her? She had spent her entire life believing she was cursed, that her inability to bear children meant she had no place in the world. To even consider the possibility of becoming the Alpha King's queen was both foreign and terrifying. She had no idea how to respond. "What do you mean by that?" she asked cautiously. "You've heard the rumors. I can't bear children." "That's why they've hidden me away. What use would I be to you?" Lucien's gaze never faltered. "It's true that an heir is important, but it's not the only thing that matters. I need someone who understands the pack, someone who will stand by my side when the challenges become too great. The pack needs more than a bloodline. It needs unity, it needs strength, and it needs a queen who can guide them." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I don't expect you to decide now, but I want you to consider it. I want you to come back with me to the castle. Help me lead. Together we can secure the future of the kingdom." Arya felt a chill run down her spine as she processed his words. The castle, the throne. Everything she had ever known told her that she had no place in such a world. She had been outcast, hidden away, and now the Alpha King, one of the most powerful men in the land, was asking for her help. It was a proposition too strange to even imagine. "But why me?" she whispered, her voice shaking with uncertainty. "Why come to me?" Lucien's expression softened, a flicker of something like vulnerability crossing his face. "Because despite everything, I believe you're more than what they've made you out to be. I believe that together, we can break the chains that bind this kingdom." The silence between them stretched thick and heavy as Arya fought to make sense of it all. Her mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts, each one contradicting the other. How could she possibly accept? How could she go from being a hidden outcast to standing by the Alpha King's side? But deep down, beneath the uncertainty and fear, there was something else. A spark of curiosity, of hope that had been buried under years of isolation. Perhaps this was her chance. Perhaps this was the change she had longed for. With a deep breath, she nodded, though her voice was barely audible. "I will come with you." The ride to the castle was long, the cold wind biting at Arya's skin as she clung to the horse's saddle, the rhythmic pounding of hooves the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. Lucien had said little since they left her cottage, his gaze always ahead, focused on the path. Arya, however, couldn't stop thinking. The further they traveled, the more questions piled up in her mind, questions that she hadn't dared to ask before. Why her? What did he truly want from her? Was it really just about the kingdom? Was there something more? She had agreed to go with him, driven by a strange mix of fear and hope, but now with the towering walls of the castle looming in the distance, the reality of it all was starting to settle in her chest like a heavy stone. The castle's silhouette rose against the dark sky, bathed in the eerie glow of the moon. Its spires pierced the heavens, cold and imposing, an unyielding reminder of the power Lucien held. The gates were wide open as they approached, the guards standing at attention as Lucien led her through. There was no welcoming cheer, no fanfare, only silence. Arya could feel the weight of the castle's ancient stones pressing in on her, a sense of history that made her feel small and insignificant. Once inside, they were led to a large, dimly lit hall. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. Arya's eyes wandered, taking in the ornate tapestries that adorned the walls, the heavy oak doors, the polished stone floors that echoed with every step. But despite the beauty of the place, the sense of unease didn't leave her. It felt like she didn't belong here. Lucien's steps were confident, assured, as he motioned for her to follow. His presence was unshakable, yet there was an undercurrent of something else, something softer that she couldn't quite put her finger on. The Alpha King, a man of power and responsibility, but also someone who carried a burden that she couldn't yet understand. They stopped in front of a large door at the end of the hall. Lucien turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You'll be staying here for now," he said quietly. his voice surprisingly gentle. "This is your room. Rest. We'll speak more in the morning." Arya nodded, still unsure of what to say, her thoughts swirling in a haze of confusion and uncertainty. Lucien turned and began to walk away, but before he disappeared through the doorway, he stopped and looked back at her, his eyes locking onto hers. "There's something you should know about me, Arya," he said, his voice low. "I didn't come to you just because you're the only woman who might bear my heir. I came to you because of something far more personal." The words hung in the air, and Arya's heart skipped a beat. There it was again, something deeper, something that didn't make sense. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke, it was as if there was more to his intentions than just a political alliance. He hadn't told her everything. She could feel it, the truth hidden behind his carefully crafted words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucien hesitated for a moment, his gaze softening as he seemed to wrestle with his own thoughts. "There's a prophecy, one that's been passed down through my family for generations. It speaks of an Alpha Queen who will come not only to rule but to break the curse that has haunted our people." Arya's breath caught in her throat. A prophecy? A queen? She had heard the whispers before, but she had never believed in such things. Prophecies were nothing more than stories, tales told to children. But the look in Lucien's eyes told her that this was different, that the curse he spoke of was real. "I don't understand," Arya said, confusion evident in her voice. "How does this have anything to do with me?" Lucien stepped closer, his presence towering over her. For a moment the air between them seemed to hum with tension, and Arya felt the pull of something she couldn't explain. He lowered his voice, as if sharing a secret that could change everything. "The prophecy speaks of a woman who is said to be Barren, the one who will be the Alpha's true mate. The one who will bring an end to the curse that has plagued us for centuries." Arya's heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of his words settled over her like a heavy shroud. She wanted to deny it, to tell him it was impossible, but the certainty in his voice, the depth of his belief, left her speechless. "You," Lucien said quietly, his gaze unwavering. "You are the one." Arya recoiled, her mind racing. The idea that she, Barren, cursed Arya, could be the one to end an ancient curse was beyond her comprehension. She had spent her entire life hiding, living in the shadow of her inability to bear children, and yet here was Lucien, the Alpha King, telling her that she was the key to something greater, to his kingdom's survival. "I'm not the one you think I am," Arya whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her disbelief. I can't be." Lucien stepped back, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and determination. "I didn't believe it at first either," he said softly, "but I've seen it in the way you carry yourself, in the strength that others have overlooked. The pack needs you, Arya. We need you." As he turned and walked away, Arya stood frozen in place, the magnitude of his words settling deep within her. She had never imagined that her life would take such a turn, but now, standing in the heart of the Alpha King's castle, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The room felt colder now, despite the flickering fire burning in the hearth. Arya stood by the window, gazing out at the dark expanse of the kingdom below, her mind swirling with the weight of the prophecy Lucien had shared with her. The idea that she, barren and isolated, could be the key to breaking a centuries-old curse seemed almost laughable. She was no queen. She was just a woman who had been cast aside by her own people for something she could not control. The castle was silent, save for the distant echoes of footsteps in the hallway. She had been given a large, lavish room, far more opulent than anything she had ever known. The heavy curtains, the grand four-poster bed, the soft carpets underfoot, all of it seemed like a dream, an illusion. How could she belong here? How could she, someone who had spent her life in hiding, suddenly be thrust into this world of power and intrigue? Lucien had left her alone to think, to process the weight of his words. But in truth, Arya felt more lost than ever. He had asked her to be his queen, to stand beside him as the alpha of his kingdom, but there was more to it than that. She could feel it in the way he had looked at her earlier, the way his eyes lingered, the unspoken tension that passed between them. It wasn't just about the kingdom, was it? There was something deeper, something between them that neither of them could name. The door creaked open, and Arya turned to see Lucien standing in the doorway. He was dressed in a simple tunic, his face softened by the dim light of the room, his eyes focused on her. She swallowed, feeling her pulse quicken despite herself. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I didn't mean to overwhelm you." Arya met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's not that," she said softly, though she wasn't sure how to explain the turmoil inside her. "It's just, I don't know if I can be what you need. I've spent my entire life being told I'm nothing. How can I suddenly be the answer to something so important?" Lucien took a step closer, his presence filling the room. He didn't speak right away, as if carefully choosing his words. "I never asked for this," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "To be alpha, to carry this burden. But it's my responsibility. And I need someone who will stand with me, not because of blood or titles, but because they believe in what we can build together, what we can become." Arya felt her breath catch in her throat. There was something in his eyes, something raw and honest that unsettled her. She had seen this side of him, the powerful king, the ruler of a kingdom. But she hadn't seen this, the man, the person who was just as uncertain and human as anyone else. "I don't know if I can be that person for you," Arya said, her voice trembling. "I'm not the woman you think I am." Lucien reached out then, his hand brushing gently against her arm, sending a jolt of warmth through her. His touch was unexpected, tender, as if he was offering more than just comfort. He was offering something real, something between them that neither of them had planned for. "Arya," he whispered, his gaze never leaving hers, "you're more than you think. I see it in you, the strength, the resilience. It's why I came for you, not because of the prophecy alone, but because I believe in you." Her heart raced as his words sank into her, the sincerity in his voice wrapping around her like a tangible force. She had always felt invisible, always relegated to the shadows. But here, in this moment, with Lucien standing before her, she felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. "You think I have strength?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She felt the distance between them shrink with each passing second, the tension between them building like a storm on the horizon. "I know you do," he replied, his voice firm but still gentle. "And that's why I need you. We can't do this alone. Together we can change everything." There was a moment of silence, a beat where neither of them spoke, but the weight of their emotions filled the space between them. Arya's mind spun as she tried to process his words, to make sense of the strange pull she felt toward him. She had always kept people at arm's length, always told herself that she was better off alone. But Lucien was different. His presence was undeniable, and the bond between them felt almost magnetic, as if something beyond reason had drawn them together. "Lucien?" Her voice faltered, and she turned away slightly as if she needed the space to breathe. "I'm afraid. I'm afraid that if I let myself believe in this, I'll only end up hurting you. I don't know if I can be the person you need." Lucien's hand found hers then, his grip firm but gentle, grounding her in the moment. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," he said softly. "I'm asking you to be real, to trust me, and to trust yourself." Arya met his gaze, her chest tight with the weight of everything she was feeling, the fear, the uncertainty, and the inexplicable connection that was beginning to blossom between them. She didn't know where this would lead, or what would happen next, but for the first time in her life she wasn't sure she wanted to fight it. "I'll try," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucien smiled then, a soft, knowing smile, and for the first time since meeting him, Arya felt like she wasn't standing alone. The days in the castle were filled with a strange quiet, the kind of quiet that made Arya feel like she was waiting for something to happen. The walls of the castle, though magnificent, felt oppressive. She spent most of her time in her room, not yet ready to step fully into the world Lucien had invited her into. The weight of the prophecy still loomed over her like a storm cloud, and her mind refused to accept the idea that she, of all people, could be the one to end the curse. But even as doubts clouded her thoughts, there were moments when she could feel something changing within her. Lucien had been patient, giving her space to adjust, but he also kept his distance. It was as though he was waiting for her to make a move, to step into the role he had so carefully envisioned for her. The tension in the air was palpable the morning the test came. The sound of pounding hooves echoed from the courtyard below as soldiers and warriors gathered. Arya stood by the window, watching as the warriors prepared for a raid, a mission that Lucien had been planning for weeks. Her thoughts were interrupted when the door to her room swung open. "It's time!" Lucien's voice broke through the quiet, carrying an air of urgency. Arya turned, startled by his sudden appearance. He stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, his eyes burning with the kind of intensity that left her breathless. "I've received word of a band of raiders threatening our northern borders," Lucien explained, his voice steady but urgent. "I need to leave immediately, but there's something I want you to do while I'm gone." Arya's heart skipped a beat. "What do you need me to do?" Her voice was quiet, uncertainty creeping into her words. Lucien stepped further into the room, his presence overwhelming. He took a deep breath before speaking. "You'll stay here and manage the castle in my absence. The advisors will be looking to you for guidance. Show them that you're capable, Arya, that you are not just the woman from the rumors, that you are the future queen." The weight of his words sank into her chest like a stone. Manage the castle? Lead in his absence? She had never been prepared for anything like this. But as she looked into Lucien's eyes, she saw something there that made her hesitate, a flicker of trust, of belief in her that she didn't fully understand. "Me?" she asked, the doubt in her voice evident. "I can't—" "You can," Lucien interrupted gently. "I believe in you, and I need you to believe in yourself." His eyes held hers for a long moment, a silent plea for her to take the step he was asking of her. The room felt charged with something unspoken, something she hadn't expected. Arya swallowed hard, the sudden pressure of the moment pushing against her. She could feel the old fear rising in her chest, the fear of failure, of not being enough. But there was also something else, a flicker of defiance, a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. She was more than the rumors, more than the woman hidden away in the cottage. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steadying. The decision felt final, though part of her wondered if she was making a mistake. Lucien's face softened, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I knew you would. Take care of the castle, Arya. The pack will be watching you. Prove to them that you are the alpha queen they need." As he turned to leave, Arya felt a strange sense of resolve settle over her. This wasn't just about managing the castle, it was about proving to herself that she wasn't defined by her past, that she could stand in this place, this world, and carve out her own future. Lucien left, and Arya stood in the room, the sound of the door closing behind him lingering in the silence. The air felt heavier now, as though it was waiting for her to act. She took a deep breath and turned toward the door. She had no choice but to face what lay ahead. The castle had been quiet for so long, but now it hummed with purpose, with a sense of urgency. The advisors, the warriors, the pack, they were all waiting for her to step into the role she hadn't wanted, but had been thrust into. Arya walked down the long corridor, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step she took felt heavier, but with each passing second, she felt a little more certain of herself. She was no longer just Arya, the outcast. She was something more. The grand hall was filled with murmurs as the advisors gathered, their eyes turning toward her when she entered. The weight of their gazes, their expectations pressed against her, but she didn't flinch. She was ready. "Gather the troops," Arya said, her voice firm. "We will fortify the castle, prepare for the worst." The advisors exchanged surprised glances, but no one dared to question her. The decision had been made. Arya was in charge now. The silence in the castle that had once felt oppressive now seemed more like a cloak of waiting, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Arya had taken control of the situation, stepping into a role she had never imagined for herself. The advisors, though hesitant at first, had followed her lead. The soldiers had begun their preparations, the tense atmosphere filling the castle as every step seemed like a decision that could change everything. But as the hours wore on, Arya found herself retreating to her chambers once again. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the task she had been given. It wasn't just about fortifying the castle or preparing for battle. It was about something deeper, something that stirred in her heart every time Lucien's words echoed in her mind. "I believe in you." Those words, so simple, so filled with trust, had unsettled her. They weighed on her now as much as the heavy responsibility of running the castle. She had never been anyone's first choice, never been anyone's hope. But here she was, leading with the kind of strength that had been buried deep within her for years. She could almost feel Lucien's eyes on her, watching from afar, waiting for her to succeed. The door creaked open, and Arya turned, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Lucien standing in the doorway, his presence as commanding as ever. He didn't say anything at first, his gaze lingering on her, as if searching for something that she couldn't quite place. "I've heard the castle is in good hands," he said finally, his voice steady but warm, as though proud. "You did well." Arya felt a blush creep up her neck, her eyes briefly flickering away. She wasn't used to hearing praise, especially from someone like Lucien, someone who was a king, a leader of a powerful pack. Her heart pounded in her chest, uncertain of how to respond. She had taken charge, yes, but part of her still couldn't believe that she was capable of doing it. She hadn't believed in herself until she had been forced to. But now, with the weight of the castle's future in her hands, she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. "I just followed your orders," Arya said, trying to downplay her success, her voice quieter than usual. "I just did what needed to be done." Lucien took a step closer, the space between them closing in a way that made her breath catch in her throat. His gaze softened, his hand reaching out slowly, as if unsure of how far to go. "You did more than that," Lucien replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You did what no one expected. You showed them you can be their queen." Arya's heart skipped. "Queen!" The word still felt foreign on her tongue, as though it wasn't meant for someone like her. But Lucien's eyes, his intense gaze, made her question everything she had ever believed about herself. For the first time, she felt like the weight of the world wasn't on her alone. Lucien wasn't asking her to carry it, he was asking her to share it. She felt a flicker of doubt rise within her. "I'm not the queen you think I am," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've never been someone with the power to rule." Lucien's eyes narrowed, his expression softening with understanding. He stepped closer, his hand gently brushing her cheek. It was the kind of touch that felt both natural and impossible. He was a king, and she was just a woman who had been cast aside, never fit to rule. "Maybe you're not," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. "But I believe you can be. We can be. Together." Her breath caught in her chest, and she found herself staring into his eyes, feeling the weight of his words more than the air around them. There was an undeniable connection between them, a bond that neither of them had asked for, but that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. Lucien's gaze flickered to her lips, and she could feel his breath on her skin, warm and inviting. For a brief moment, all the fears, all the doubts she had about her worth seemed to fade into nothing. She wasn't just standing beside a king. She was standing beside someone who saw her, who believed in her more than anyone ever had. "I can't do this alone, Arya," Lucien whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "I need you." Her heart fluttered in her chest, her body responding to his proximity, to the weight of his words. She was scared, scared of failing, scared of being the one who wasn't enough. But at the same time, there was something about him, about them, that made her believe maybe she could be the woman he saw. Maybe, just maybe, she could be enough. Without thinking, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was soft at first, uncertain as if testing the waters of something neither of them had planned. The kiss deepened, slow but urgent, as if they both knew that the bond between them could no longer be denied. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, hearts racing. Arya's mind was still spinning, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. She was no longer just Arya, the outcast. She was someone more. "Together, then," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We'll do this together." Lucien's eyes softened, and for the first time since she had met him, Arya saw the vulnerability in his gaze, the rawness that matched the uncertainty in her own heart. "Together," he agreed, his hand gently holding hers. "Always." The morning after the kiss felt like a quiet storm, the air in the castle heavy with anticipation. Arya had not slept well, the restless thoughts of her newfound responsibilities swirling in her mind, tangled with the powerful pull she had felt toward Lucien. It was a strange mix of hope and fear, a desire to be with him, but also to prove that she could do this, that she could be the alpha queen he needed. As the day unfolded, Arya found herself spending more time in the castle's war room, surrounded by maps and scrolls detailing the kingdom's borders, the threats that loomed just beyond them. The advisors, who had once been skeptical of her, now turned to her for direction. She had learned quickly, absorbing Lucien's lessons, understanding the intricacies of his rule. But no amount of preparation could prepare her for the betrayal that was coming. It started with a whisper, a subtle shift in the air. She had been meeting with the council, discussing the next steps for fortifying the kingdom's defenses, when a servant entered, her face pale and worried. The servant whispered something in the ear of one of the senior advisors, who quickly excused himself from the meeting. Arya watched him leave, her curiosity piqued, but she didn't let on. Something was off. Moments later, another advisor, an older man named Alden, approached her quietly. His eyes, usually filled with respect, were now clouded with something darker. "Your Grace," Alden said, bowing slightly, "there is a matter of great importance I must speak with you about." Arya nodded, motioning for him to speak. "What is it, Alden?" Alden hesitated, glancing nervously toward the door before speaking in a low voice. "There are rumors, Your Grace, whispers of discontent among some of the higher ranks of the army. They question your authority and your place at the king's side." Arya felt a cold chill run down her spine. The words hit harder than she expected. She had known there would be resistance, knew that some would not easily accept her as the Alpha Queen, but hearing it so bluntly made her stomach twist. "Discontent?" Arya repeated, her voice tight, the sting of betrayal creeping in. "Why?" Alden's face softened, but the worry remained. "Some believe that Lucien's decision to elevate you, to make you his queen, is a mistake. They think you are unfit to lead, that you do not have the blood of true nobility, that you lack the strength that a queen must have." Arya's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. She had feared this moment, the moment when others would try to undermine her, but hearing it out loud, spoken with such certainty, felt like a personal attack. She glanced down at the map in front of her, trying to steady her thoughts. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alden's gaze shifted, but he did not immediately answer. Finally he spoke, though his words were reluctant. "Lord Garrick, one of the most trusted men in the army. He's spreading these rumors, fueling the discontent among the men. There's talk of rebellion, Your Grace. If we're not careful, it could divide the pack." A wave of anger surged through Arya. Lord Garrick. She had always known there were those who saw her as an outsider, but to hear that a man like Garrick, someone who had sworn loyalty to Lucien, was the one behind the rumors, was a bitter pill to swallow. "How do you know this?" Arya asked, her tone sharp now. "Are you part of it?" Alden flinched, shaking his head quickly. "No, Your Grace. I stand with you. But there are others who believe that the kingdom is better off without you at the helm. They think you are weak, that Lucien has made a mistake in trusting you." Arya's mind raced, her heart pounding. She had fought for every inch of her place here, fought to prove that she was more than the curse that had defined her. But now it seemed that all her efforts might be for nothing. Lord Garrick and his supporters were dangerous. They had the power to dismantle everything she and Lucien had worked for. "I will not let this kingdom be torn apart by rumors and lies," Arya said, her voice low and dangerous. "We will find out who is behind this and deal with it." Alden nodded, but there was a trace of fear in his eyes. "You must be careful, Your Grace. Garrick is powerful. He has many allies in the army, and he has been loyal to the pack for many years. If you make an enemy of him, I will make an enemy of whoever stands in the way of this kingdom's future, Arya interrupted firmly. I will not let anyone tear down what Lucien and I are building. Not now, not ever. Alden stepped back, bowing his head. I will do whatever I can to help, Your Grace. But be cautious. There are forces at play here that you do not yet understand. As Alden left the room, Arya stood still for a moment, the weight of his words settling heavily in her chest. She had known it wouldn't be easy to gain the kingdom's trust, but the thought that someone as close to Lucien as Lord Garrick was plotting against her was a harsh reality. The betrayal stung, but Arya knew what had to be done. She would confront Garrick, expose the traitors, and prove to the kingdom that she was worthy of her place by Lucien's side. And this time, she would make sure no one ever doubted her again. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, golden light across the stone walls of the castle as Arya stood before the ancient tapestry in the throne room. Her fingers brushed over the intricate designs, her mind not entirely on the image before her, but on the words Alden had spoken, the rumors, the betrayal, and the growing sense of tension that weighed heavily on her shoulders. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of the fabric as the breeze from the open window stirred. Arya's thoughts were clouded, and the prophetic words from Lucien echoed in her mind, the weight of the future pressing down on her like an unseen hand. A woman who is Barren, the one who will be the Alpha's true mate, the one who will break the curse. She didn't know what to make of the prophecy, but Lucien believed in it, and that belief had led her here. His eyes had said more than his words ever could. The belief he had placed in her, the trust, she couldn't ignore it, even if part of her still wasn't sure she was worthy of it. The castle seemed too still, as though it was waiting for something to happen, for some kind of signal that everything would fall into place. But Arya wasn't sure if that moment was coming. She had her doubts. And now, with the threat of betrayal looming, the future felt more uncertain than ever. The sound of footsteps broke her reverie, and she turned sharply to find Lucien entering the room. His expression was more guarded than usual, and his eyes carried a weight she hadn't seen before. He looked as if he had been awake for hours, already immersed in the concerns of the kingdom, yet there was a softness in his gaze when he met her eyes. "Arya," he said, his voice low, the seriousness in it making her heart skip a beat. "We need to talk." She nodded, her throat tight. "What's happened?" Lucien hesitated, his jaw tightening as he closed the distance between them. "The rumors. They've spread further than I anticipated. Garrick's words are reaching even the most loyal among the pack. I can't stand by and let this continue." Arya felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of Garrick's name. The betrayal was deeper than she had initially realized. She had known Lord Garrick was dangerous, but to hear that he was turning the pack against her, against Lucien, made her blood run cold. "I've heard," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Alden told me. It's not just Garrick, is it? There are others who think I don't belong here, that I'm not the one who can lead." Lucien's gaze softened and he stepped closer, his hand brushing hers in a gesture of comfort. "It's not just about you, Arya. This is bigger than either of us. The kingdom, the pack, they are fractured, and the prophecy, it's our last chance to unify them." Arya looked up at him, her heart heavy with uncertainty. "The prophecy," she repeated. "You think it's real?" Lucien sighed, running a hand through his hair, his face tense. "I didn't want to believe it either. But there's a reason it's been passed down through generations. It's not just a story, Arya. It's a part of us, a part of our destiny." A shiver ran through her at his words. She had always been skeptical of tales and myths, but Lucien's certainty unsettled her. How could she, of all people, be the answer to this ancient prophecy? She was the one who had been hidden away, forgotten, and now she was supposed to save a kingdom. "I don't know if I can do this, Lucien," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I've never been anything more than a burden to my family. How am I supposed to be the Alpha Queen that unites this pack?" Lucien's expression softened, and he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. You're not a burden, Arya. You've never been. The strength that lies within you is what will save us. Not just the prophecy, but your heart, your courage. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel the weight of his trust, but doubt clung to her like a shadow. How could she be the one to end the curse? How could someone like her, someone deemed unworthy by her own people, suddenly stand beside Lucienne and lead? The prophecy says that you're the one who will break the curse, Lucienne said softly, as though sensing her inner turmoil. It's not about whether you believe in it. It's about what we can build together. Her chest tightened at his words. The truth was, she didn't know if she could be the alpha queen they needed, but she knew that Lucienne believed in her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel that belief settle deep within her. I'll try, she whispered, her voice shaky. I'll try to be the woman you need, Lucienne. Lucienne's eyes softened, and he pulled her into an embrace. Together, he murmured against her hair, the warmth of his arms surrounding her, giving her a sense of comfort she hadn't known she needed. The future was uncertain. The kingdom fractured, and the prophecy hung over them like a veil they couldn't escape. But for the first time, Arya felt a spark of hope ignite inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she could be the one to bring them all together. The weight of the prophecy lingered like a shadow over Arya, a constant presence that neither comforted nor reassured her. Each step she took within the castle felt more burdened than the last. It was a heavy thing, this trust Lucienne had placed in her, expectations that seemed impossible to meet, yet she couldn't escape them. Every decision felt monumental. The castle, once a place of safety, now seemed like a battleground where her every move was scrutinized. She hadn't been prepared for this. She hadn't been prepared to fight for her place, for something she hadn't asked for. But the murmurs from the advisors, the tension in the air, told her that the kingdom was at a breaking point, and it was her who had to stand at the forefront, even if she still doubted herself. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard when the news came. It was the same servant who had brought her troubling news before, her face pale, her footsteps hesitant as she entered Arya's chamber. "Your Grace," the servant said, her voice trembling. "There's a matter you need to know." Arya's pulse quickened as she turned toward the young woman. "What is it?" she asked, her heart already sensing the unease in the air. "The soldiers, there's been a confrontation at the northern gate," the servant continued, wringing her hands nervously. "Lord Garrick, he's leading a rebellion." The words struck Arya like a physical blow. Garrick. She had known, somewhere deep down, that the whispers and rumors were only the beginning. But to hear it confirmed, to know that a man so close to Lucienne, someone who had once been trusted above all others, had turned against them, it made the world feel like it was crumbling beneath her feet. "No," Arya whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "He can't be. He's been with Lucienne since the beginning." "He's not alone," the servant said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Others are with him. The rebellion is growing. They believe the pack needs a stronger leader. They say you are unfit to rule." Arya's blood ran cold as the servant's words sank in. "How many?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the rising fear within her. She had to stay composed, she had to think clearly. "Enough to threaten the borders," the servant answered. "They're rallying, Your Grace." "We can't stop them if we don't act quickly." Arya felt her heart racing, panic beginning to set in, but she forced herself to focus. The pack was fractured. Her enemies were within. She had never imagined this level of betrayal. It wasn't just a threat from outside forces. It was from within her own people. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Where is Lucienne?" she asked, trying to keep her composure. "He's at the front lines," the servant replied, "but if Lord Garrick and his followers have already gathered strength, we need to act now." The room seemed to close in around her as the magnitude of the situation sank in. Lucienne had always been the one to handle threats to the kingdom, to protect his people with unwavering loyalty. But now the loyalty of his own pack was in question, and she was the one left behind to figure out how to hold it all together. "I need to speak with Lucienne," Arya said, her voice firm. "Gather the guards. We need to secure the castle before they reach us." The servant hesitated but nodded. "At once, Your Grace." As the servant hurried away to carry out her orders, Arya stood alone in the dimly lit room, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind raced, searching for a plan, something, anything, that could bring order to the chaos unfolding within her kingdom. She had known this would come. The pack's unrest, the whispers of rebellion, it had all been building toward this moment. But still, to face it head-on felt like something she wasn't ready for. But there was no more time for doubt. Lucien had chosen her to stand at his side, to rule with him, and now she had to prove that she was worthy of that trust. She couldn't run from this. Not now, not when the kingdom was on the brink of war. The betrayal was a harsh reality, but it was also an opportunity. An opportunity to show the pack that she was more than just a woman in a prophecy. She was the future of this kingdom, and she wasn't going to let it fall into the hands of traitors. Taking a deep breath, Arya straightened her shoulders, determination replacing the fear that had threatened to paralyze her moments before. She wasn't just the Alpha Queen. She was the ruler of this kingdom, and she was ready to fight for it. The tension in the castle had reached a boiling point. Every hallway felt more oppressive, every corner more shadowed as the sound of footsteps grew louder. The rebellion led by Garrick and his supporters had spread like wildfire, and with each passing hour the stakes grew higher. Arya could feel it in her bones, the pressure, the weight of the responsibility she had once thought she was too small to carry. The news of the rebellion hit harder than she could have expected. Lucien, who had been her rock in this kingdom, was away at the front lines, battling the physical manifestation of what had been festering inside the pack for far too long. But now it was her turn. The walls of the castle no longer felt like a place of refuge. They felt like a fortress under siege. Arya sat in the war room, the grand table before her strewn with maps and reports. She had ordered the soldiers to take defensive positions, to strengthen the outer walls, and to prepare for any threat that might come from the north. But none of this felt real. None of it felt like it was enough. The heavy wood of the table creaked beneath her grip as she stared at the scattered pieces of the kingdom she was supposed to protect. Every line, every decision felt like a choice that could either save them or doom them. The rebellion was no longer just a threat. It was a reality, and she was at the heart of it. She let out a breath, her mind racing when the door opened, and Alden, one of Lucien's most trusted advisors, entered. His face was lined with worry, his eyes betraying the fear that had begun to take root in the castle. "Your Grace," Alden said, his voice low, his steps hesitant as he approached her. "The defenses are in place, but we've received word that Garrick's forces are already moving through the northern woods. They are much closer than we anticipated." Arya clenched her fists. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the weight of it was more than she could bear alone. She wasn't just protecting the castle. She wasn't just protecting the throne. She was protecting a future that had been uncertain for so long. "Do we have enough men?" Arya asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts raging inside her. "Not enough to withstand a full attack," Alden admitted. "The rebellion is growing stronger with each passing hour. The loyalty of some of the key families in the pack is wavering. We've lost some of the support that we once had." Arya's chest tightened. The realization that the people she had trusted were turning against her, against Lucien, was more than just a betrayal. It was a threat to everything she had fought for. "But we have to fight," Arya said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "We cannot let Garrick win." Alden hesitated, his eyes searching hers, looking for the leader he had seen in her from the very beginning. "What is it that you intend to do, Your Grace?" "The odds are against us." Arya stood, her hands gripping the edges of the table as she looked down at the maps before her. She could feel the weight of Lucien's words, the belief he had placed in her. The kingdom was fragile, but so was she. The prophecy had said she was meant to lead, to be the strength that would break the curse, but what did that really mean? Was she truly strong enough to lead them through this? The answer came to her, as clear as the air she breathed. "We will stand our ground," Arya said, her voice hardening with a resolve she had never known she had. "We will fight for every inch of this kingdom. If they want to test our loyalty, they will see the strength that lies within us." Alden looked at her with a mix of respect and awe. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to rise to the challenge the way she was now. She was no longer the woman who had been hidden away in the cottage. She was no longer the woman unsure of her place. She was a queen in the making. "You're right," Alden said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. "We will stand with you, Your Grace." A fire ignited within Arya, the flames of determination burning brighter than ever. The rebellion, the betrayal, they could all be dealt with. But it was her strength, her resolve that would see them through. She was the Alpha Queen, whether she had believed it before or not. The future of the pack, of the kingdom, rested on her shoulders now, and she wouldn't falter. She turned back to the map, her mind already plotting the next steps. "Prepare the men. We will fight with everything we have. We will show them that no one, not even Lord Garrick, can tear this kingdom apart." The morning broke over the kingdom with a chill that made Arya's breath visible in the air, but the cold seemed to have no effect on the fire burning inside her. The castle was a hive of activity, the corridors filled with soldiers and advisors, rushing to prepare for the battle that would define the future of the pack. Garrick's forces were close, too close, and the time to act was now. Arya stood at the window of her chamber, looking out over the vast landscape that stretched beyond the castle walls. The sky was a dull grey, clouds hanging low, reflecting the somber mood within the walls. But Arya wasn't afraid. She wasn't sure if she had ever truly been afraid, not when it came to fighting for something she believed in. Her hands gripped the stone windowsill as she watched the men prepare below. The soldiers were lining up, their armor clanking as they moved into formation, their faces grim but resolute. These were not just warriors, they were her people, and she was going to protect them, even if it meant sacrificing everything. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Lucien standing in the doorway. His presence filled the room like a storm. He had always been the rock, the protector, but today she saw something else in him. A quiet resolve, a recognition that this battle was unlike any other they had faced before. The kingdom's future rested on them both, and there was no turning back. "Arya," Lucien said, his voice low but steady. "The men are ready. We need to make our stand now." She nodded, her heart swelling with pride. Lucien had led them through so much already, but this time it was her turn to lead by his side. The prophecy, the doubts, the fears, they all seemed like distant memories now. She was here, and she was ready. For herself, for the pack, for Lucien. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm, though there was a fluttering in her chest. "Let's do this." Lucien smiled, a small, knowing smile before stepping forward to clasp her hands in his. For a moment, they simply stood there, the weight of everything pressing down on them, but neither of them moved. It wasn't just the battle that mattered now. It was the bond they shared, the promise they had made to each other. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "I believe in you," Lucien said, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've always believed in you." Arya squeezed his hands, feeling the warmth of his confidence seep into her. She had always feared being a failure, but here, in this moment, she knew that she wasn't. The pack, her people, Lucien, they needed her, and she would not let them down. The moment stretched for a heartbeat longer before they were both interrupted by a sharp call from outside the door. The army was ready. The time for words had passed. Arya took one last glance out the window, steeling herself for what was to come. The northern gates were just beyond the horizon, and she could already see the dark figures of Garrick's forces gathering in the distance. The battle would be fierce, but Arya knew that she had the strength to face it. She followed Lucien out of the room and into the courtyard, where the army was lined up, waiting for their orders. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, the weight of the armor she wore heavy but comforting. She wasn't the same woman who had once hidden away in a cottage, questioning her worth. She was the Alpha Queen, the leader of this kingdom, and today she would prove it. "Form up," Lucien called, his voice carrying over the crowd. His presence was commanding, and the men responded immediately, falling into formation with precision. Arya stood at Lucien's side, feeling the energy of the soldiers surge through her. They were ready. But she could see the unease in their eyes, the uncertainty that still lingered. This was a battle for everything they had fought for. There would be no retreat. Today, we fight not just for the kingdom, but for the future, Arya said, her voice rising above the clamor. We fight for our people, for the strength of our pack, and we will not back down. The soldiers' faces hardened with resolve as Arya's words took root. She saw their determination, felt it rise in the air around them, and it was enough. This wasn't just Lucien's war anymore. This was hers too. With one final glance at Lucien, she turned toward the gates, her heart pounding in her chest as the sound of battle horns echoed in the distance. The enemy was near, but for the first time Arya felt ready. This was their fight, and she would not let them lose. The battlefield was silent in the aftermath of the chaos. The ground was littered with the remnants of the fight, broken weapons, discarded shields, the heavy scent of blood mingling with the smoke in the air. The once vibrant fields around the castle now seemed cold and barren, scarred by the violence that had taken place. Arya stood at the edge of the battlefield, her heart heavy with the weight of what they had just endured. Her armor was tarnished, blood staining her hands and face, but the sight of the victory that had been hard won was slowly sinking in. They had fought hard, and in the end they had managed to push Garrick's forces back. But it had come at a cost. The pack had suffered losses, too many to count, and Arya felt the hollow ache of it deep within her chest. Lucien had fought beside her, as always, but even now she could see the toll the battle had taken on him. His face was grim, his posture stiff with exhaustion, but his eyes, the eyes that had once shone with certainty and fire, were now clouded with doubt. He had led them through the worst of it, but the weight of responsibility had never been more apparent. She took a step toward him, her boots sinking slightly into the wet earth beneath. "Lucien," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of both gratitude and sorrow. "We did it. We held them off." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something akin to relief, but it was fleeting. "We survived," he corrected her quietly, "but the battle isn't over, not really. We've pushed them back, but the damage, it's done. The pack is broken." His words hung in the air, heavy and final. Arya's chest tightened. He was right. The rebellion had shaken the very foundation of their kingdom. The unity they had fought so hard for felt fragile, like it could crumble at any moment. But even in the face of this uncertainty, Arya felt a flicker of resolve. "No," she said firmly, her voice rising slightly with the force of her conviction. "It's not broken. We may have lost some of our own, but we're still standing, and as long as we are, we fight, we rebuild." Lucien's eyes softened, but the weariness didn't leave his gaze. He reached for her hand, his grip warm but trembling slightly from the strain of the fight. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he admitted, his voice a whisper amidst the stillness of the battlefield. "I don't know if I'm enough to lead them, to fix everything." Arya's heart ached at his words. She had always seen him as invincible, the alpha, the leader, the protector. But now, in the quiet aftermath of the battle, she saw the cracks in his armor. He was human, after all, and the weight of everything was starting to show. "You are enough," Arya said, her voice firm, reaching for his hand and squeezing it gently. "You've always been enough. We've always fought together, Lucien, and we always will." He didn't respond immediately, but his fingers tightened around hers, a silent acknowledgement of her words. For a moment they simply stood there, the distant sounds of soldiers regrouping in the background. The world seemed to pause around them, as if giving them a brief respite from the storm. "I can't do this without you," Lucien said, after a long pause, his voice breaking the silence. "I don't know how to lead them without you by my side." Arya's heart swelled at his words. She had never been the person to stand in the spotlight, but here with him, she felt like she had finally found her place. It wasn't about the prophecy or the titles. It was about the strength they had found in each other, the unity they had forged in the fires of battle. "I'm here," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I'm here with you." "Always," Lucienne finally met her gaze, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a spark of hope in his eyes. They had faced the darkness together, and they would face whatever came next together as well. The dawn of the new day broke slowly over the kingdom, a soft light piercing through the clouds that had hung heavily over the land for so long. The battle was over, and the kingdom, though scarred and shaken, had survived. Arya stood at the edge of the balcony, her eyes tracing the horizon where the sun rose like a symbol of hope. It had been a long and difficult journey to get here, but they had made it. The castle, once a place of uncertainty and tension, now felt like home. The soldiers had returned victorious though weary, and the wounded were being tended to in the makeshift infirmaries throughout the grounds. The rebuilding would take time, but Arya knew that with each day, the strength of the pack would grow. Beside her, Lucien stood in silence, his presence a constant source of strength. His hand found hers, and he squeezed it gently. The unspoken connection between them had deepened, not just through shared battles, but through a mutual understanding of the future they now faced together. "We did it," Lucien said quietly, his voice still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. But there was a peace in his words now, a calm that hadn't been there before. Arya nodded, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. "We did," she agreed, her voice steady. "But it's only the beginning." Lucien turned to face her, his eyes searching hers, as if seeing her in a way he hadn't before. "I couldn't have done it without you, Arya," he said softly. "I never thought I needed anyone like this, but now I see that together we are stronger than we could ever be apart." Her breath caught in her throat. She had always been afraid of being alone, of not being enough. But now, standing here with him, she felt the truth of his words settle into her heart. They were stronger together, not just as king and queen, but as partners, as equals, bound by a love that had been tested and proven on the battlefield. "You've always been enough, Lucien," Arya said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've always been everything I needed." The silence between them was comfortable, a reflection of the bond they had built. In the past, Arya had been uncertain of her place in the world, unsure of what her future would hold. But now, she knew. She knew that her place was beside Lucien, leading their people forward, together. As they stood there, the first rays of sunlight casting a golden glow over the castle, Arya felt a deep sense of peace. The kingdom was healing. The people were healing. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly at home. "The pack is yours, Arya," Lucien said, his voice filled with pride. "It's ours." She looked out at the kingdom, her eyes filled with determination and hope for the future. "Ours," she echoed, the weight of the words settling on her shoulders. It was a heavy responsibility, but it was one she would carry with all the strength she had. Together they would rebuild. Together they would lead. And together they would ensure that the future of the kingdom was brighter than any of them had ever imagined. As the sunlight bathed the land in warmth, Arya and Lucien stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. The past had been filled with uncertainty, but the future was theirs to shape. With each other there was nothing they couldn't overcome. And so a new beginning unfolded before them, one of unity, strength, and a love that could never be broken.